is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Europe is in the grip of an unprecedented energy crisis. Its oil and gas taps are drying up. At the center of it all is the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which the EU accuses Moscow of orchestrating. To punish Russia, the EU quickly imposed a range of crippling economic sanctions on Moscow. A bad idea, as it soon emerged. Europe is heavily dependent on Russia for its oil and gas supplies. However, Russia has been slowly turning off the taps. Now, caught between a rock and a hard place, Europe has had to look elsewhere to satisfy its energy needs. Africa, which has some of the world's biggest supplies of crude, has emerged as one of the top options. But at what cost for Africa? Many are already asking. This week on the program, we explore the extent of the energy crisis in Europe and interrogate whether indeed Africa can fill Europe's huge energy deficit. We also expose the hypocrisy and cynicism in the fight against climate change this turn of events has brought to the fore. I'm Lindim Tongana. Welcome to Talk Africa. The European Union is courting Nigeria to provide the bloc with liquefied natural gas supplies as it weans itself off from the reliance from Russia. EU officials visited Nigeria earlier this year, and officials from the state-run petroleum company, the NNPC, committed to boosting supplies to the Eurozone. CGTN's Deji Badumosi has more.
Nigeria already exports liquefied natural gas to Europe. Last year alone, it exported 12.63 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe through the Nigeria Liquefied Natural Gas, NLNG.
Currently, the 6 trains of Nigerian LNG produces about 22 metric tons of LNG per annum and about 5 million tons of LPG per annum. At certain times, due to gas shortage, there may be shortfall in this nameplate of gas production.
Europe accounts for 40% of Nigeria's gas exports, but the bloc says it wants more as a result of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In April, a European delegation met with authorities in Nigeria to extract a commitment on increased gas supply, and the government gave the commitment.
Nigeria will be very willing, and we are very well positioned to be a reliable partner, reliable supplier of energy to Europe.
Authorities are looking beyond the NLNG to drive its gas supply to Europe. The country is currently working with other African countries to construct gas pipelines from Nigeria to Europe. 2 of such projects are the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline that will transport natural gas from Nigeria's Niger Delta region to Europe via Algeria, and the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline, which will link up with the West African gas pipeline and take natural gas to Europe through Morocco.
So if both pipelines are completed, then you can be sure that our gas here will be destined for Europe.
But both projects are capital intensive and long-term, and even the NLNG is still working on improving its capacity with additional trains. There's also the problem of inadequate LPG for the domestic market, where prices have since hit the roof. It's a complex situation with no easy fix. One thing though is clear: Nigeria has an abundance of natural gas reserves, up to 260 trillion cubic feet, that could potentially be increased to 600 trillion cubic feet. Mining enough of the gas for revenue has been the big challenge. Deji Badumosi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, let's now bring in our panel. Joining us from London via Zoom is Dr. Elif Celine Chavik, an energy consultant based in London and author of Renaissance of Smart Energy. In Johannesburg, also via Zoom, we're joined by Langa Madongo, economist and principal consultant at Summit Africa. And from Lagos, Mr. Balazaka, a petroleum engineer and an oil and gas analyst. Thank you to all 3 of you for joining us for today's program. A very warm welcome to you. I want to start with Dr. Chavik in London. Of course, Europe's energy shortfall is being described as a crisis, a nightmare, an energy system pushed to the limits. And it certainly can't be helping that Europe is currently experiencing its worst heat wave ever. Dr. Chavik, tell us from your experience just what the magnitude is of this energy crisis.
It's a falling chain of energy dominoes, one in which each tile is worth many billions of euros, especially for this winter. In Europe, when the dust settles, the total bill for rescuing the European energy market this winter will easily top more than $200 billion. It is a rough estimate of International Energy Agency. So here in London, let's look at the households. The UK is paradigmatic of the problem. Last February, London announced a multi-billion pounds bailout to cushion the impact of 54% increase in the country's retail energy cap. So currently the near 70% increase is set to be announced in early August next month. So this is the figures of Government Energy Regulation Institute, Ofgem. On the other hand, Germany has similar situation in Europe. It is not difficult to predict that next winter will be very, very expensive in Europe.
Absolutely. And in fact, one journalist from the UK's Guardian newspaper shared a rather grim forecast for Europe's winter, saying it's going to be a long, cold, calamity-filled winter of power shortages and turmoil. Langa Madonko, I want to come to you for a moment now. We know that Europe was quick to respond to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, giving a lot of support to Ukraine and, of course, imposing sanctions. Now, considering Russia's retaliation when it comes to the matter of oil and gas, do you think Europe's response was perhaps a little short-sighted?
The impact, or rather the magnitude of the dependence on Russia by Europe was probably understated in terms of what was the perceived impact of the sanctions on Europe. I think we've immediately seen, as Edin has spoken to, how the gas prices have immediately shot up. We've seen the energy crisis that has already started to be felt. And I also think we've also started to see how we've needed to move away in Europe anyway from using just renewables as a solution for providing energy to moving to coal. I think out of South Africa, for example, 15% of all the exports of coal since the war began have been to Europe towards reigniting some of the fire stations, the coal-powered stations there. And I think some of the measures that have been taken, whilst right in terms of trying to bring an end to a war, were not fully considered in terms of what their impact would be on the energy situation. And I think we're still yet to see more issues unveiling, because we know the extent to which Ukraine and Russia are important also as wheat producers into the region. And we're still yet to see how that plays out for the food situation within the European bloc.
And so I want to bring in Dr. Bala Zaka now in Lagos. Mr. Zaka, why is Africa an option? Let's talk about the kind of oil and gas reserves that this continent is sitting on and the extent to which it could perhaps fill that energy gap in Europe.
Well, one will expect naturally that based on what is happening between Russia and Ukraine and the sanctions and the retaliation of Russia, the only continent to turn to is the continent of Africa. And fortunately, Africa is endowed with so much crude oil and gas as we speak. And when you look at it globally, we are talking about energy security here. And the first thing you require is general security in any country or nation or continent. And after that, the next thing you require is energy. Because once you have the energy, then, citizens can embark on activities that will make them to create aggregate mobility of transactions. And it is from there that they will be able to comply with their civic responsibilities of paying taxes and levies. to generate revenues for their government and to grow the gross domestic products of their respective countries. So I think it's the right time, though it's happening due to hostilities and sanctions. And what we hope and expect is that, there will be a mutually win-win and positive relationship for both partners. That's the countries turning towards Africa and the continent of Africa also.
And we'll come back to that question of whether or not this is a win-win arrangement for the two continents. But I want to just take a closer look at Africa's capacity to actually deliver on this notion of filling that energy gap in Europe. Dr. Chavik, let me come back to you. Africa does have the oil and gas reserves, but what about the infrastructure, the pipelines, the export terminals to make this a reality?
Africa's biggest gas energy project, Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline, it is 4,000 kilometer line, and it is like a crescent shaped line. We can call this pipeline that crescent shape pipeline, crescent. And I always call this pipeline golden crescent because it is starting from Nigeria, Ghana, Guinea, Senegal, Mauritania, and ended up Morocco, Africa's European border country. So it includes 11 African countries. So a couple of weeks ago, a Nigerian president has called Europe to help fund $25 billion for this important historical gas pipeline by highlighting its potential to solve Europe's energy crisis. So it is really, really important in terms of relationship between Africa and Europe.
And Dr. Madonko, I want to come to you on this same topic about Africa's realistic capacity to really help Europe at this time. I mean, we know that countries like Italy, for instance, are shopping around for gas and oil in Angola, in the Republic of Congo. Can these kinds of countries deliver on this need that Europe currently has?
Yeah, I think, in my view, from a capacity perspective to deliver on the commodities, Africa definitely has the capacity. We definitely have the raw resources in order for us to meet that need. But as you have rightly said, I think our greatest impediment will be infrastructure. I think Dr. Lin, when speaking to it, also alludes to the fact that the gas line that allows us to evacuate, the oil line that allows us to evacuate oil from Nigeria into Europe still needs to be constructed and needs to go a long way. We've got gas reserves in Mozambique, for example. We don't have the adequate infrastructure to evacuate those and lead them into Europe. We speak about coal from South Africa, and South Africa in of itself is having troubles with the ports. So I think the greatest impediment and probably the greatest opportunity for gain for Africa is in the enablement of that infrastructure. I think the quicker we can take advantage, the greater we can benefit from the current crisis. And yes, we'll need some partnership coming out of Europe, coming out of the developed economies to make sure that there's a realistic benefit for Africa. And I think the greatest economic advantage that we have right now is that we possibly could, for the first time, be negotiating on our terms, because it's currently not realistically a crisis that's being experienced in Africa, but Africa has the solution to that crisis.
And that brings us to what Mr. Zaka raised earlier, the potential for this to be a win-win arrangement for both Europe and Africa. Mr. Zaka, we know that Africa stands to gain in terms of jobs, in terms of the millions in revenues rather, that can be made at a time when we still are recovering from the pandemic. So do you think that these deals could be very positive for Africa?
Well, what's happening at the end of the day will be positive for the continent of Africa. But I think it will not be immodest if I say, as far as energy infrastructures are concerned, the continent of Africa was somehow docile. I can give a specific example about Nigeria. More than probably 3 or 4 decades ago, the Nigerian leaders then conceived the idea of what we then call the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline. And the intention then was to construct gas pipelines from Nigeria through North Africa, through the Mediterranean Sea, into Europe. I'm just trying to imagine what will have happened now if those structures or infrastructures were put in place. At a point, okay, to take care of the West African sub-region, they came up with what we call the West African Gas Pipeline project, which has seen reasonable progress. So if the Trans-Saharan Gas Pipeline project and initiative had crystallized, something tells me that Europe will just switch towards such infrastructures. But it's a wake-up call for Africa too. We mustn't wait, or Africa mustn't wait until opportunities come to the gates like this. But the key thing is to always be futuristic in their thinking, to also be generational in their thinking, especially when it comes to energy and energy solutions.
Absolutely. So some missed opportunities in the past, but new opportunities today. Mr. Madongo, I want to come back to you in Johannesburg. What are the specific kinds of deals African oil and coal exporters should be signing to guarantee maximum returns?
I agree with Mr. Zaka that the greatest dividend that we can probably realize from this is co-investment into the infrastructure. I think we shouldn't look at it only exclusively from the perspective of what's the best price we can get for the coal. And as Dr. Leaf has said, how do we structure partnerships to finally produce the pipeline from Nigeria all the way to Morocco? And that pipeline will not only have a benefit for Europe, but will also have a benefit for the West Africa sub-region. How are we mobilizing expertise in order to enhance the quality of the ports and the roads so that we can bring those resources to the terminals so that we can further benefit from the export potential that exists? But I think we also need to be looking at this even further. How do we then, in the process, also look to invest in the infrastructure for the local economies? Is the dividend that we're going to realize from what some are already calling a coincidental commodity boom going to be invested in making sure that the energy situation in Africa itself, which we know in many instances has lagged behind, is also addressed?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We will leave it there just for the moment. We'll take a short break. And when we come back, we'll talk more about this and find out whether Africa stands to gain from signing new energy deals with Europe. And is Europe's own climate commitment taking a back seat with economic growth and energy security being threatened? Do stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Let's continue with our discussion. Still with me in London is Dr. Elif Selim-Chavik, an energy consultant and author of Renaissance of Smart Energy. In Johannesburg, Langa Madongo, economist and principal consultant at Summit Africa. And from Lagos, Mr. Bala Zaka, a petroleum engineer and an oil and gas analyst. Well, I think now it's time that we talk about the elephant in the room, which some have labeled as Europe's own hypocrisy. We know full well that Europe doesn't want to fund oil and gas projects in Africa and has been actively discouraging the use of gas and other fossil fuels around the world in pursuit of global climate goals. And of course, now, though, Europe is looking to import that gas. I want to start with you, Langa Madongo. Interestingly, the news publication Foreign Policy has labeled Europe's stance as gas for me, but not for thee. Is it fair then that Africa is supposed to leapfrog the use of its own oil and gas and coal that it would rather perhaps exploit for the benefit of its own people?
In my view, it's slightly unfair because I think our infrastructure currently is built for the exploitation of those resources. And because we've got such huge disparities in terms of the infrastructure development here and the infrastructure development in Europe, again, I go back to the concept of a just transition. It can't be that we need to leapfrog, we need to transition into it. We are all pro moving towards green solutions, but I think this further heightens the need for a just transition. It can't be that we are now saying from an African perspective, all your new solutions need to be just on the basis of solar and wind. We need to make sure that it's a measured and managed approach towards achieving those goals. For us to be benchmarking the entire world in terms of when we need to achieve this on the same footing, when the level of development of infrastructure for those solutions on the African continent, for example, is not at the same footing as where Europe has been, would be unjust. I think we need to be making sure that in our investment towards a green economy, we're not neglecting investment into other spaces. Because I think one of the biggest challenges that we currently face is that if you look at infrastructure investment on the African continent and what is being attracted, we are seeing a large chunk of that infrastructure being invested into energy, while we still have glaring shortages in terms of healthcare infrastructure, education infrastructure, road, rail, port infrastructure, and even airports. And I think we need to always be allowing Africa to be a balanced developing community. We need to not only focus on the energy solutions of the future, but make sure that we're enabling the whole environment. We are starting to see higher levels of unemployment creeping up across the continent. And we also need to be dealing with that in terms of creating other pockets of the economy, not just in the energy space.
Well, let me share with you what Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has had to say on the matter. He says we need long-term partnerships, not inconsistency and contradiction on green energy policy from the UK and the European Union. He further goes on to say it does not help their energy security, it does not help Nigeria's economy, and it does not help the environment. Mr. Balazaka, coming to you, what does your president mean by these remarks with specific reference to Nigeria?
I want to call Africa an emerging continent. But what was happening was a case of the developed nations and continent moving probably at a faster rate, or speed compared to the continent of Africa. Because we were when other continents were talking about going green, when they were talking about renewables, we knew that even the fossil fuel we have within the continent of Africa has not been put to use. We knew that we were grappling with basic electricity supplies. We require diesel, we require what we call petrol, kerosene, and the rest, and people are still cutting firewoods here to cook. We were not having liquefied petroleum gas for cooking. So when that philosophy or that concept or drive came to go green, within the continent of Africa, we knew we were largely behind. But because it was a global vision, the continent of Africa and Nigeria wanted to key in. But what has just happened is a clear indication that, when there is a sudden halt in any system, people are likely to adjust. Because what happened from the Russian-Ukraine crisis just led to a kind of halt and a disequilibrium in energy supplies, energy vision. So to that extent, it seems now Africa and Nigeria in particular is saying, so the coal deposits we have, or we have always had, will be important. The crude oil we have is important. Even the natural gas that is a cleaner fossil fuel, which we thought we needed to move away from, is suddenly important. And if that is the case, then this time around, probably there is a need to be very honest as members of global community. There is a need for us to have a partnership that will lead to a win-win situation, because we now want what will be good for other parts of the world to also be good for the continent of Africa and also to be good for Nigeria.
Absolutely. Dr. Chavik, coming back to you, as Europe is looking to fill this energy gap and turning to resources such as oil and gas, it is almost inevitable that we will see a rise in emissions. Is Europe suggesting anything in the line of mitigating this negative impact on the environment?
As it is highlighted in last year during COP26 in Glasgow, there are two things important: certainty and leadership. Those two things can attract green investment and achieve continental, like Africa, for example, achieve Africa's socio-economic development goals, and also Europe's social economic development goals as well. So I think Africa can also partner with competitor countries that also willing gas producers. So how much Africa show really boldly partnership in terms of green investment with Europe, that much the continents can get the more fair basis in terms of reaching net zero 2050 targets.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Zaka, I want to come back to you for a moment on this matter of the environment. One can't easily forget the massive environmental destruction that Shell caused in the Ogoniland region in the early 90s and the impact that that is still having on the environment today. We've seen the scramble for Africa. We might be looking at a scramble for Africa's oil. How important is it that Africa insists on guarantees to protect the local environment at all costs?
It's very important that the environment is secured, because everything about survival is the ecosystem. And based on that, we just have to make sure the environment is secured. Then also, I think the model that many African countries or the continent of Africa has been using was probably the wrong model. But I stand to probably be corrected. I think something tells me that some of our political leaders within the continent of Africa were comfortable with the model of extracting our raw materials, whether solid minerals or oil and gas, and they were comfortable with Africa and Africans being being importing continent and countries. Because when you look at it very well, whether you talk about the areas of solid minerals or crude oil and gas, at a point there were just no infrastructures. And that docility can be put at the doorsteps of our economic and political leaders. At some point, something tells me that they were comfortable to be relying on imports, which was not in the interest of Nigeria and the continent of Africa. Because if they were to care for the environment and we internally domesticate things here, then apart from exploiting the mineral resources, we were supposed to take care of the environment by making sure if there is any form of biodegradation, somehow, somewhere, we must take steps to bioremediate those concerns. But I think somehow, somewhere, probably the models that they were using were the wrong models. They were probably using the models of being comfortable with our resources being exploited and we behaving or being comfortable with more of importation. But I think with what is happening now, I think there will be probably a balanced discussion on the table. And that's why I was probably talking and hoping that we are likely to see probably a win-win situation this time around.
Well, we certainly hope so. Thank you so much. That is all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our panel of experts. In London, Dr. Elif Celine Chavik, energy consultant and author of Renaissance of Smart Energy. In Johannesburg, Langa Madongo, economist and principal consultant at Summit Africa. And in Lagos, Bala Zaka, petroleum engineer and an oil and gas analyst. Now remember, you can be part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and Twitter. And you can watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more from Talk Africa. From me, Lindy Mtongana, and the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, goodbye.